Hello, everybody. For those of you I've not met before, my name's Catherine Hollins, and I'm a child psychiatrist. And I've really been looking forward to today and this chance to offer something into the whole pot of how we understand behaviour. And the theme I've taken for about half an hour or so that I'm going to be talking is about how we understand behaviour in children and ourselves, and how this knowledge can profoundly change how we respond to babies, children, and young people. Next slide. You are very welcome. I am so delighted when I read who is here, what a mix of people we have. And so you're welcome whether thinking about the theory behind behaviour is completely new to you, whether you're interested in learning new things and it's quite new to you, and also whether you're very experienced. And there are also many people experienced in thinking about this who have come. Thank you for being here too, and for sharing and contributing. And hopefully today will bring fresh ideas for you, for us as well. Whatever your circumstance, I hope that there's something here for you. Next slide. So I'd actually like to invite you to arrive, if you haven't yet, and be present. If you like, get comfortable. If you need to raise your shoulders and let them go, let them go. Perhaps put your phone on silent. If you like, make an intention to be present and to engage fully. And if you can, it depends what's happening for you right now. If you like, take 3 breaths with me, which will calm maybe a little your nervous system so that you're ready to learn and connect. And you might like to breathe in for 4 and out for 6. So do it in your own time if you'd like to. Thank you. Next slide. Everything changes when. So I'm going to give you 2 thoughts to start us off, which we'll come back to at the end. Everything changes when we understand that behaviours can be unintentional, they can be adaptive, and or they can be protective. Now, many behaviours can be unintentional, can be not within our conscious awareness. There are also behaviours that are intentional, and babies start in a position of having very little, well, in fact, no ability to be consciously intentional. Toddlers have a lot less than most of us realise when we're parents. And it's probably only around 3.5, 4 that really the ability to be more intentional starts. When I'm talking about unintentional in this talk, it's to see whether we can increase our net for how many behaviours that we're doing and the people around us that are really not planned. They come from body up, not top down. And I'm going to also talk about adaptive and protective behaviours, which is quite a useful idea, and I'll come on to that a bit later. Really, that's about the fact that some behaviours we don't want to eliminate. They're actually really useful in children and in ourselves. They can calm us. They have a purpose. They have a communication. Even the behaviours that are really annoying and irritating in ourselves and others are communications. They can make us be curious and think, why is this child wanting to behave like this? And perhaps the challenge for us is not to assume we can work out the intention of someone else very easily. There may be lots of things there. So the second thing is everything changes when our response starts with settling our own state, is relationship-based, and has a primary aim for the child to feel safe. And I'm going to be looking at this through this talk. Next slide. So the way I'm going to look at it is through these three areas. I'm going to think about how we understand behaviour from different perspectives, from the child, practitioner or parent, the setting. I'm going to, I'm smiling because it's so big. Think about the breadth and the depth of behaviour, but through three particular perspectives. Our physiological state, what state our body's in our nervous system, the context, things like whether we're hungry, and our lived experience, which is a big pot, and we're going to have a little look at that. And I'm going to end with a little bit about how we then might respond once we understand a little bit more about the richness of what lies behind behaviours, with these three C's: compassion, curiosity, and co-regulation. Next slide. So for some of you, the word co-regulation will be something you know, but actually, even if you do know it, and I speak for myself with that, it's not a word we use every day. So I wanted to bring that in early on because I really want to bring you with me on this word because it's a really useful one. So look at this picture. We're going to say that there's a mum and daughter here. And what we can see is that there's a ball being held by this girl, and the mum looks ready to receive it. And the girl is looking to see if mum's ready. And what we can imagine is that they may well be in the middle of throwing this ball back and forth. And we can call this a tuned connection. They're both in tune, they're both involved, and they're actually regulating each other's nervous systems. But the adult can really do something amazing for this child in terms of playing. I'm going to read a short quote from Mona Delahooke, and I've put a couple of her books at the end of the talk that you might be interested in, but this is one of them, the Brain Body Parenting book, and there's another called Beyond Behaviours. And this is a quote about play and why co-regulation is so key when we're thinking about behaviour. She says, play is the best brain-body exercise as it helps a child to build self-regulation while integrating a range of sensations, ideas, and emotions. And you're doing that whilst you're playing in this rather fun, appealing context of relational safety. So what she's saying is, we want children to learn to self-regulate, to begin to control their emotions, their behaviours. But how do they do that? They do it through our co-regulation and sensitive being in tune with their experience. Next slide. So if we start with ourselves, there was a question at the beginning of the webinar that you may have had time to think about. No worries if not. And my question is, how intentional is our behaviour? Who here knows that being well-behaved, kind and gentle is not easy to keep up all the time? Who can remember a time, maybe earlier today, when they behaved in a way they hadn't planned towards a family member or a colleague and regretted it afterwards? I have that experience every day. Maybe your tone of voice, maybe your facial expression, maybe your body language, your words, your actions. And who can recognize something of the feelings they had in their body before or during that behavior? I think we know there can be unintentional and intentional, and that it can be quite mixed up in ourselves too. Next slide. So let's think about the three perspectives. And depending which room you go in later, you could look into these in a bit more detail in our breakout rooms for this webinar. So from the child's perspective, I love this picture. Here's this little boy looking out. So from the inside out, when I behave in a particular way, I am experiencing bodily and emotional feelings inside me that are telling me I feel safe, or I feel under threat, I'm not safe, or I feel in danger. This is where we start from. I wonder if any of you have seen the Inside Out films, which also give some more richness to thinking about what's going on inside children and in their emotions. Next slide. So on the outside in, what do we see when we're looking in? When we see a child behaving in a particular way, we're seeing their affect, their mood, their emotions shown through their behavior. And can we hold on to the fact that the behavior is the tip of an iceberg? Imagine those icebergs, imagine those pictures. It's the tip. Have a look at this picture that Annika found. It's a rather wonderful picture, Annika. You know, how do you feel looking at this boy? He seems to be kind of going, you could almost imagine him going la, 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 la. You know, as the adult, you might be feeling quite irritated inside you at this behavior. You know, what are you assuming? What's the intention, you know, behind this in this boy? Is he doing it just to really annoy you? What's going on? Next slide. So the invisible lion, there's a reference to this at the end if you're interested in more. But I want to tell you give you a very short vignette. So imagine you're out for a lovely country walk, having a nice chat with a friend, walking along through a big field. Suddenly you see someone running towards you from afar off. They're screaming, they're shouting, their hair is everywhere. All of their limbs are flailing. They look just furious or scared, or you don't know what is going on. What assumption might we make? What thoughts go through our minds? You know, wow, you know, they're upset, they're angry. Perhaps I should stay away. What's happening? Then you see there's a lion chasing them. There's a lion chasing them. Then what do you then think? You think, oh, that makes sense. Now I know why they're behaving like that. There's a lion chasing them. That absolutely explains it. So the thing is, if we hold that image in mind, we can remember that there can be invisible lions. There can be things going on that we have no idea of inside a child or an adult. It may be as big as a lion, it may be much smaller, but there are things that may be behind that we're not seeing from the outside in. Next slide. And as part of this outside in, this is another phrase from Elspeth Bradley, outside in me. And this is important. The inferences we make about other people's behaviors, about children, about young people, about toddlers, that are based on our own personal inside out experiences. So what that's saying is we make judgments about what other people are up to because of what's going on inside us. And if we're honest, that happens a lot. It happens a lot. So what gets in the way of us understanding? It can be so many things. And this isn't about judgment. It's about being curious. So we might be protecting ourselves because we need to. We're tired. We're overwhelmed. We have our own painful or traumatic life experiences. So it's actually hard to be in touch with someone else's when we're feeling like that. There can be social or cultural norms. Our society, in many ways, is organised around avoiding distress or pain in others. Children should simply know how to behave better. That is, again, very much in our culture, if we're honest too. So can we find the imagination, the patience and the kindness to see what might be going on? Next slide. And the third setting, or the third perspective, is the setting. So this has a big impact. for all the different settings. I mean, looking at all of the richness in this group who are here today listening, and if you're listening to this later after the webinar, whatever your particular role or whatever is in your mind or your experiences, what are the cultural or social expectations held by your organisation? What are the policies about acceptable behaviour? What are the unsaid things like, by this age, you should be old enough to do so and so? And what does this mean when each child is different? How does that then relate to equity? And equity is about saying this child has a particular need and we need to think in what way we can respond to that need. Each child is different, actually. We could just have that as the comment for this webinar, couldn't we, Annika? You know, each child is different, and therefore understanding their behaviour and the response needed will be different. Next slide, please. So my second area that I'm going to touch on, I hope you're still with me. This is very much a whistle-stop tour of some ideas and offerings for you about behaviour. So this slide has a lot in it. Please look lightly or just listen to me if you prefer and come back to this later. Understanding the depth and breadth of behaviour. So first off, what is the physiological state of this child's body? This is where to start, to be curious. Is their nervous system in a state of safety, threat, or danger? This is such an important area and one that we often haven't had the chance to explore yet in our organisation. So I'm going to come back to this after this slide. What's the context? Is this child hungry, tired, unwell, bored, in need of more movement and stimulation, or in need of less movement and stimulation? What's this child's lived experience? Wow, this is a really big area. There's so many things to consider, many of which we may not know, but can we be curious about whether any of this might be the case? So, development. Where is this child on their own developmental journey? Their attachment style, secure, insecure, disorganized. Age, social and emotional development. There's not one right way of growing up and developing, and each child does it in such different ways, as many of us know from our work and personal lives. Children are incredibly unique. We are all so different. Individual differences. How does this unique child experience themselves? How do they experience their relationships? What's it like being in their family? What's it like being in their school group, their peers? And what about the physical environments? Is it too much, too bright, too noisy? What's it like for them? This is thinking about sensory processing, a whole important area. Additional needs and disabilities, poverty, adverse childhood experiences, and dimensions of exclusion, such as racism. And then finally, what about past experiences? Might there be some stress or unresolved trauma in the mix? Trauma is a word that I think isn't always very easy to use, and a very simple definition that comes from Bessel van der Kolk, who wrote a book called The Body Keeps the Score, which I really recommend if you haven't seen it yet. His definition of trauma is when our capacity to cope has been overwhelmed. That's it. That's what trauma is about, and we haven't yet been able to resolve that. So are there issues there? And remember that children might not know if there are any, parents may not know, we may not know. So to keep an open mind as to what might be triggering particular response. Sometimes children can be very explosive, and it may be that in years, months gone by, they've been bullied or they've had experiences that have really set their nervous system up to be on edge, for example. Next slide. So I'm going to give you a brief introduction on the polyvagal theory, and just 2 or 3 slides. Don't worry about the words so much, more look at the picture. And this is about that first thing I talked about, the physiological state of the body. And I really hope something of it makes you curious to find out more about it. And there's a reference at the end of the slides. So the reason I think this is useful is because it tells us something about the response that our body has, the neuroception. You might have heard that word in the video at the beginning. A boy says he has faulty neuroception. And what that's about is, does our body pick up that we're safe? That's the green that is in this picture, and the green nerves going up into our face, our cranial nerves, this section. Is our body picking up we're safe? Is it picking up that we're under threat? And that's the red. You can see the sympathetic nervous system going up through the body. Or is it picking up that we're really in danger? And that's the blue, the dorsal vagal that's going up through the body. Those 3 things happen outside our consciousness, but our body picks it up before we've even known it in our conscious minds. It's really useful information. Our body's very helpful to us giving that information. When it's faulty is when our body thinks we're under threat, but we're not. So there's no point then saying to a child, calm down, you're safe. Doesn't necessarily work, because that's a cognitive comment to a body that's saying, no, 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 I'm under threat. We might have to model or be alongside to help the body calm. The words be calm won't necessarily work. It's a body up experience. Next slide. I'm offering another picture. Again, don't worry about the words at this point. Much more look at the picture as another way into understanding the 3 states that at any time, all of us will be in one or other of these 3 states. Right now, I'm hoping that you're in, even if not in a yogi position like the girl at the top, in a what Stephen Porges calls your social engagement system. What a great term. So he's been the person who's developed polyvagal theory, Stephen Porges. He's a neuroscientist, and he started by looking at the nervous system in fetuses, babies. So the social engagement system, that girl at the top of the ladder, and I'm hoping many of you will be there, means that we can engage, we can learn, we can be interested, we can assume the best in others when we're in this state much more easily. The middle picture of the boy looking nervous and scared, some of you will be feeling like that because of your day so far, because of what's going on for you in life. No judgment. It's noticing what state we're in that is important, because then we can think about, well, how can we find our way into a place where we feel safe? That boy in the middle, threat, not safe, heart rate going, breathing going a bit. Girl at the top, calmer, safer. And then the one at the bottom, which is the picture of a person who's looking very slumped, face maybe dropped, really feeling hopeless, shut off, maybe numb. So that's that kind of state of mind and body. Next slide. The only reason I wanted to show you this is because I think it's a rather beautiful picture of the polyvagal theory and how you can see it. But again, don't worry about all of it. Maybe just that left-hand top circle, the social engagement, which is the part that enables us to smile, to engage, for our voice to go up and down and have prosody, for the muscles to calm and be soft. So next slide, please. Deb Dana has translated much of Stephen Porges's work, and this is a phrase from her to try to put into a word the polyvagal view of behaviour. Through a polyvagal lens, we understand that behaviours are automatic and adaptive, generated well below the level of conscious awareness. This is not the brain making a cognitive choice. These are autonomic energies moving in patterns of protection. And with this new awareness, the door opens to compassion. Next slide. There's quite a lot on this slide. What I'd like to particularly draw your attention to is the fact that through a polyvagal lens, there are different ways that behaviours can regulate so that we can calm and feel safe. The top one, dysregulation, is about those automatic behaviours when we respond to a felt sense of threat. So the lion, for example, you know, we respond, we run. That is absolutely what we do. And it's a survival mechanism, and quite right. Auto-regulation describes adaptive and protective behaviours. You may not have thought of it like this before, but when a child is tipping their chair back and forth, when they're rocking, when they're humming, singing, maybe a child who's touching or tapping other children, whether or not they are appropriate for the setting, let's put that to one side. But in terms of what they're doing, below conscious awareness, it can be an attempt to regulate and calm so they can engage. That is what the nervous system is trying to do for a child. Isn't that fascinating? And isn't that a useful way of thinking? I find it really helpful. And when we're irritated by a behaviour, to think, actually, if we understand this, that it's about their way of regulating, how might we meet what they need or what the communication is in ways that work better in this setting, for example. Self-regulation. So these are more intentional behaviours that as we grow, we can learn more intentional behaviours. And co-regulation is how we can move towards more self-regulation, as we talked about earlier. Next slide. So in the last few minutes, I wanted to touch on what this then means for how we respond. And here are 4 possible foundation stones. Again, just read this lightly, see if it's helpful for you. Calming ourselves first. If our nervous system feels safe, if we are in a place where we are able to think and connect, we are more likely to be able to respond to somebody else. Do you know, there's something I'd like to share about that. I had the most beautiful conversation with Kat Link the other day. And I work with her in the Best Start, which is a particular focus of my work in Surrey. So pregnancy, conception to age 5. But she used to be a play leader, and she was telling me about the setting and the team that she used to lead for a charity. And I was honestly so moved by hearing the way she created a relaxed setting for the team members and for the children. She talked about how they had a perspective which was they would try things. Sometimes it would work, sometimes it wouldn't. That was fine. Sometimes they'd get it right, sometimes it would go really wrong. That was fine. They would learn, they would talk, they'd reflect, they'd get feedback. And that culture enabled them to actually be a very calm, relaxed team. And wow, did that impact on how the children experienced their ability and their opportunity to play. And these were children with really significant disabilities, additional needs, who showed all sorts of communication through their behaviour. So calm, curiosity, a willingness to reflect on what we're seeing. Can we be in touch with the distress in the child and what they're communicating? Compassion. So Gabor Mate, you may have come across, speaks well about this. So a willingness to be with the suffering of others and to feel it in our bodies. This requires us being in touch with our own suffering. Let kindness to the child and to yourself be your North Star. And the fourth C, co-regulation. Can we remember to move towards shared regulation as your aim? Removing warmth or human connection is punitive, it's damaging, and it doesn't work. There are still many opportunities where that's what we can fall into, where we pull away rather than find ways of moving towards. And I'm not saying there's one way of moving towards. There are all sorts of ways, and children, of course, need space. But it's holding in mind, it's holding in space, it's being creative, being imaginative, and remembering that as humans, social isolation is the worst thing possible. It's the connection that matters. Next slide. And another way of looking at how we respond, 4 stages from Deb Dana. What state am I in? So you can think of that through the polyvagal lens if you like, but how am I? Is my heart rate slow? Is my body relaxed? How's my breathing? If not, and if those things are not quite there yet, what do I need in order to get back to a regulated state? And no judgment, it's about noticing and recognizing and being kind. And if you're not the right person in that moment, maybe someone else is, and that's okay too. What state is the child in? Third question. Observe, be interested, no judgment. And what do they need in order to get back to a regulated state? That might be something you can help with, or it might be someone else. It might be talking to a parent, it might be talking to another colleague. It might be getting a few different colleagues together, thinking about all the people on this call. There are many, many people who might have an idea about what would be useful, and it might take a lot of time and patience working it out. Next slide. Again, don't look at all the words on here, but from a polyvagal lens, there are ways of thinking about this. So just look at the green box at the top. What people, places, or practices help you or help this child to feel safe and connected? Be interested in what helps this child. Is it a particular activity? Is it doing less? Is it quiet? Is it music? Is it running? Is it reading? Finding out what is it that helps you or this child to feel safe, feel connected, and ready to engage. Next slide. So we're coming to the end of what I'm sharing. So everything changes when we understand that behaviours can be unintentional, adaptive, and/or protective. And when our response starts with settling our own state, is relationship-based, co-regulation, and has a primary aim for the child to feel safe. And this is so important. It's the perspective of the child, not ours. It's not, yeah, but the child's safe. What's the problem? I've done everything I can to mean that they're safe. It's not about that. It's about really keeping an open mind to this child. I wonder if they feel safe. And you might see it in their body language. They might not be able to tell you the words. Might be through the tone of their voice or their facial expression. Might be what the parent tells you. Might be what someone else who's made a good connection. Might be another child who can tell you. When we focus on compassion and connections with children, engagement and learning can follow. Before we started today, I thought, well, I was feeling a little bit scared about doing this. And so I thought, oh, I'll go and pick up one of my favorite books which just has various little sayings in it. And I opened it completely by random. I'm absolutely serious. I just opened it and I couldn't believe what was there. And I thought I'm going to have to read it to you. So it's by John O'Donoghue. don't know if any of you know some of his lovely writings. But if you listen to it, polyvagal theory is all the way through it. So the state of one's heart inevitably shapes one's life. It's ultimately the place where everything is decided. A courageous heart will go forth and engage with life despite confusion and fear. A fearful heart will be hesitant and will tend to hold back. A heavy heart will make for a gloomy, unlived life. But a compassionate heart need never carry the burden of judgment. A forgiving heart knows the art of liberation. And a loving heart awakens the spirit to possibility and engagement with others. Isn't that great? So we'll perhaps add that to a slide, Annika, when we send them out. So the last slide is simply some references. And of course, there are so many things that I could share on behaviour, but as you know, I've just chosen to give a broad outline and give you a little bit on something you may not know about polyvagal. So Mona Delahooke, Beyond Behaviours, gives you more around understanding how polyvagal theory can help you in understanding behaviour. Deb Dana, similarly on a broader note, and is quite useful for us ourselves as adults, practitioners, parents, human beings. The Polyvagal Institute has various resources too.